Good morning. I am the Reverend Timothy Holton. I am clergy in the United Methodist Church here in Middle Tennessee. The United Methodist Church professes, lives, and leans into the belief that every human being is made in the sacred image of God, that we are more than the brokenness we can cause or inherit, and that redemption is never beyond reach. For generations, United Methodists have stood firmly against the death penalty because it denies these truths. It cuts short the very transformation that we proclaim. It relies on a system that we know without question is scarred by bias, error, and irreversibility. But today I'm not here only as a pastor formed by this Methodist vision that insists on dignity, compassion, and grace. I am here as someone whose life has been shaped by the very violence and trauma our state tries to address with more death. Nearly 30 years ago, my family was torn open by murders so devastating that their shockwaves still move through us. Stephen, Brent, Eric, and Kayla Holton were murdered by their father, Harold Holton. Stephen, Brent, Eric, Kayla, and their father were all my cousins. The grief of their young lives being violently taken was unimaginable and has remained relentless. The confusion, the anger, the sorrow, all of it has settled deep into our bones. The state pursued the death penalty. There were some in my family who supported that, while others opposed it. What should have been a time to hold on to one another became a season that broke us in ways that we will always carry. Daryl was executed here in Tennessee, and his execution has taken up permanent space in our story, in my story, with a silence that doesn't loosen its grip. Because I live on both sides of this tragedy, both murder and execution, I can say this without hesitation. The death penalty did not heal my family. It did not mend what had been violently torn apart. It piled trauma on top of trauma and sorrow on top of sorrow. It took an already unbearable tragedy and turned it into something even more damaging and harmful for me and for my family. This is not up for debate. Now I volunteer as a chaplain on our state's death row. I know these men personally, including Harold Nichols, and I count them all as my friends. In my work for mercy and justice, I sit with families grieving violent loss. The death penalty would give them peace. I also meet with families who are grateful the death penalty was never on the table because they understand the damage it would have done to them in their most difficult hour. What my family needed was not Daryl's execution. We needed counseling. We needed trauma-informed care. We needed help understanding the untreated mental illness that played a role in my family's tragedy. We needed the system to hear us crying out for help and to respond with hope. And instead, the system damaged us deeper through false hope that evolved into one of the heaviest burdens that I have ever carried. Governor Lee, I am personally asking you to grant clemency to Harold Wayne Nichols. Not because the harm done to Karen Pulley wasn't real, because it is. Not because the grief of Karen Pulley's family and so many other families like hers and like mine isn't deep, because it is. I am asking for clemency because our death penalty system continues to wound the very people that it claims to help. Tennessee can choose a better way, a way that invests in victim services, in mental health care, and real support for grieving families, instead of pouring extraordinary resources into executing people who are already incarcerated and pose no threat to the public. The hard truth is my story isn't rare, and it never had to be this way. We can choose life. We can choose justice tempered with mercy. We can choose to stop multiplying the very violence that we are trying to end. For the sake of families like mine who carry these heavy burdens, Governor Lee, I ask you to choose mercy. I urge you to choose clemency. And I urge all of us to build a Tennessee where healing and not death is our focus.